everybody. Welcome back to the Mindful of You podcast. This is episode 39, My Advice for Jess from New Girl. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Last week, we got to hear from Janice Thomas, my mother, and you guys seemed to really enjoy that episode. So I've decided to just turn the podcast over to her. You'll see a switch in the cover photo. It's going to be my mom, and she's going to take over from here. Just kidding. But I would listen to that podcast. So if you haven't listened to that one, go ahead and check it out. It seemed to be pretty universally beloved. So today I wanted to add to what I've decided is going to be a little bit of a series here on the Mindful of You podcast. A couple months ago, maybe 2-3 months ago, I did an episode called My Advice for Candace Flynn, and I talked a little bit about Candace from Phineas and Ferb, and my advice for her, and you guys seem to really enjoy that. So my husband and I brainstormed together a list of characters that I could talk about, and generally speaking, these are characters that I feel similar to, and that I've always seen connections with and related to, and so I feel like I can connect to them. My goal with this is not to diagnose them necessarily with anything, but I want to look at specific situations in which I go, oh, they might be doing this, without necessarily diagnosing them with a disorder. So today I'm going to talk about 3 things I love about Jessica Day, which there are way more than 3. She's awesome and she's hilarious. And I'm going to talk about 4 situations in which Jess could have handled things a little bit differently. And there are probably way more than 4. I'm actually focusing on the first half of the series because that's what I've rewatched recently. So this is about seasons 1 through 3. Not all the way to the end of 3, mostly just the first part of it. And then I also want to talk about 3 general pieces of advice that I would give her while also kind of diving into these specific situations and kind of what I presume is going on in her head and how she could handle things a little bit differently. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of assuming in this episode, just so that we can get kind of a framework around what Jess could have done differently. So if you haven't seen New Girl, this episode might feel a little bit confusing, but feel free to listen anyway. I think it could still be a fun time. So Jessica Day loves other people, and she wants other people to love her. When we start the series, we see her getting ready to have a romantic evening with her boyfriend. When she comes home, she discovers that her boyfriend, longtime boyfriend, has been cheating on her for who knows how long, actually. I don't think they ever dive into that, but I'm going to guess this wasn't the first time based off of how this guy is. So after a while, she moves in with these guy roommates, and they notice that she doesn't have any of her stuff. She's left all the stuff at her ex's house, and his name is Spencer, and he's the worst. He's a really hilarious character, but he's just the worst. And they're encouraging her to go and get her stuff back. But it becomes a little bit more than encouraging when Jess is playing around with a basketball and breaks their TV. And then they ask, do you have a TV at Spencer's house? And she says, yeah. She says something really funny. She's like, yeah, I do, but it's all big and thin and shiny. So just describing the exact TV these guys would want. So they tell her she has to go get it. And she meets Spencer in the park and tries to tell him, hey, I need my stuff back. But this guy is like her kryptonite. She just kind of falls in love with him again and sees all the good parts of him that she really loves, which I don't see at all. But she ends up driving him and his girlfriend to the airport rather than getting her stuff back. So what Jess demonstrates in this episode is what I would refer to as people pleasing. She's having a really difficult time standing up for herself, and she feels like she wants people to like her. She feels like she should do these things for other people if she can. And she's kind of showing some people-pleasing tendencies and a lack of boundaries. Now, a lot of this is just to make the show hilarious, which I recognize. But if I could give some advice to Jessica Day, would definitely be along the lines of not everybody has to like you, especially your ex, especially your ex's new girlfriend that he was cheating on you with. It is okay if those people don't like you even a little bit. But to go beyond that, it's okay if you don't like them, you know? I think a lot of times we feel guilt surrounding not liking people. And just because we don't like someone doesn't mean we have to actively harass them or bully them or be mean to them. But we're allowed to just not like somebody's personality. We're allowed to think that somebody isn't handling things very well, especially somebody who's treated us this poorly. That doesn't mean we have to let it torment us. That's a different situation. We don't have to stew about it. We don't have to say, you know, like, I want to spend my life plotting for revenge or whatever, because we don't want to give them that level of control. But we also don't want to give them a level of control where they still are influencing what we do because we want them to like us or we want them to think that we still like them. It's okay if there's hard feelings. Not necessarily every situation has to be resolved in that way. Now, what she can do is some internal work so that he doesn't fill up such a big portion of who she is, that she can just move on and say, I don't have to be mad anymore, but I also don't have to maintain this relationship that was toxic and hurtful for me. She doesn't deserve that, and she doesn't owe him anything. What ends up happening in this episode is her new roommates and her best friend really encourage her, and they all end up going together to get her stuff back from his house. And it takes a little bit, and she starts to fall back into her old habits. But with their help, she's able to stand up to him, grab her stuff, and get out of there. And I think that's the last time we even see that guy. So she does kind of learn her lesson with the help of her roommates. So that's a really fun episode and situation. The next one I want to talk about is with her best friend, Cece, on Cece's birthday. On Cece's birthday, Jess comes to see her and tells her, like, I think they have some sort of tradition, I don't remember the episode super clearly, that they do together on Cece's birthday, but Cece says, I'm actually going out with the models tonight. So Cece's a model, and she wants to go out with those friends tonight, but she also really wants Jess to come. So this is a little different from what Jess is used to, and she kind of makes it very clear that she's not a huge fan of these models. So she's got a little better right off the bat of allowing herself not to like everybody. But Cece pushes and pushes, and eventually Jess ends up agreeing to go with her. So they go out to this bar or club or whatever, and the models are being really mean to Jess. Like, one of them thinks that she looks like a monkey from a commercial in Russia or something, and she is making her like she's literally saying the words dance monkey dance, and they're like making her dance and sing. It's like really comedic, but also really horrible when you think about it. And I'm just sitting there like, why is she allowing this? And she does end up getting frustrated, getting mad, but I honestly think it would have been okay if Jessica hadn't gone out at all. That might be a little bit controversial, but I also think it would have been okay if Jess had left as soon as she felt like she wasn't wanted there, or that people weren't being kind to her, that she was being bullied. And her and Cece end up getting in a big fight over this. But I'm sitting there like, hey, Jess, like, it's okay if your friend's upset with you for not being with her on your birthday, but you don't have to allow yourself to be treated like this. She feels like she has to go out because her best friend wants to, but that's kind of what a boundary is she can say, hey, I would love to spend time with you before or after, but I really don't feel comfortable with those people, so I'm going to stay home beyond that. And now I know especially this version of Cece would not have been pleased with that, but sometimes that happens when we're setting boundaries with people. We're going to say how we're going to handle a situation. Again, we're not trying to control Cece. We're not saying, Cece, you can't go out with those models, but we're going to say, hey, I don't feel comfortable, so I'm not going to go. You go have fun. Maybe we can get together tomorrow. But I also think there's a part of Jess that's hanging on to the fact, hey, we spend all your birthdays together. We spend all those birthdays together. That should be how it is. And sometimes there's hard things like that, but we still want to set that boundary and protect ourselves from being mistreated. Okay. This next one is one of my favorites. This is from an episode called Jess and Julia. This one has always been so interesting to me because I'm really not super on Jess's side in this episode. I think there's some things that I'm definitely a little more on her side when it comes to how Julia talks to her. But Nick gets a new girlfriend. She's a lawyer and her name is Julia. And she's meant to act as a foil to Jess and kind of be her opposite because Jess is a love interest for Nick. So they brought in this character that was sort of supposed to act as a foil and be just kind of the opposite of who Jess is while looking almost identical to her. So they have very similar looks, but Julia is very different. Jess really embraces her femininity, and she wears a lot of like bows, dresses. The thing she's interested in would be considered stereotypically feminine, while Julia, on the other hand, tends to dress a little bit more conservatively. She is a lawyer. She's trying to compete with men in her field, and feels that with that, she needs to assert dominance and kind of lean more into her masculine. So, it's an interesting situation because this is classic case of Jess, not everyone has to like you, and you do not have to like everyone. So, they end up having a great relationship, spoiler alert, but not without some bumps along the road. So Jess gets a speeding ticket and she asks Julia for help getting out of the speeding ticket. And Julia is kind enough to say, okay. I think she probably feels obligated because she has this new boyfriend and she knows that they're friends and she wants to impress her boyfriend and make sure everything's good there. So Julia goes over to help Jess with this speeding ticket situation, and Jess has made like cupcakes and is wearing like a cute little dress. They're really pushing this like, hey, they're super different thing. And she offers Julia a cupcake and Julia says, oh, no, thank you. I'm not a dessert person. This is like earth shattering for Jess's character. She's like, what? Like, who doesn't like desserts? Who doesn't like sweets? And she ends up like basically forcing this dessert on this woman. And this is the part where I'm really not on her side. So she's sitting there and she's like, just sitting there, and Jess like puts a blanket over her lap and then puts like a cupcake in her hands. And I'm like, girl, back up. Like, that's not cool. She told you no, thank you. That's okay. You can just be like, okay, and move on. So part of this is pushed because it's just a TV show. So they're going to force some drama and some comedy. But it really makes me super uncomfortable every time I watch that episode. So in this situation, I would say, hey, Jess, respect when somebody tells you no thank you, even if it seems bizarre to you and something like people should like, you know. I think of this sometimes when people say, no, I'd rather sit alone, thank you. If you offer to sit by somebody, it's okay to accept that. They probably mean it. And so I think sometimes we feel that in social situations, people should want a certain thing or that we're trying to do something kind. But if they don't view it that way, or if they don't want our help in that situation, it's okay not to push it. It's okay to just say, okay, well, let me know if you need anything. And Jess could have said, okay, well, I'm going to put the cupcakes on the table. If you want one, feel free to grab one. And I think that would have been completely appropriate. But the way she handled things there, not great. So this whole episode kind of has a theme of Julia not being super kind to Jess and Jess feeling hurt because Julia's not being super kind to her. And this is where I do feel for Jess and I go, hey, yeah, that's not super nice. But we kind of see Julia put Jess in this box of she's pretending to be feminine, she's pretending to be girly and to like all these things to basically impress guys. And it kind of comes down to Julia's a little jealous of her and is worried that she's going to take her boyfriend away from her because she's so soft and pretty and feminine. And it's really some interesting themes in this episode, but I think what Julia ends up learning here is, no, this is genuinely who Jess is. I also think she learns to embrace a little bit more of her own feminine side, which is really cool. And I do enjoy those themes, but I wish Jess would have recognized a little bit more that what she was doing wasn't necessarily okay as far as pushing this girl's boundaries and trying to get her to be somebody she wasn't. So the last one I want to talk about is an episode called Nick's Box. So this is when Nick and Jess are actually together and they're dating. And Nick comes into a whole bunch of money. He gets a bunch of money in a paper bag. It's super sketch. And he is blowing it. He's spending it on the most random things and really, in my opinion, so I agree with Jess here, not handling his money in the best fashion. However, I don't remember how Jess finds the box. I think Winston maybe shows her, or Nick shows her. But Nick has a box full of bills and things he's avoiding paying. And Jess is pretty appalled by this. And while Nick is gone spending some of his money doing different things, Jess takes it upon herself to pay some of his bills. Now, this situation is really fascinating because I relate to this, and I think what's happening here is Jess is worried that her partner is not who she wants him to be, and she's worried that if she can't fix that or if she can't change that, then they are not going to end up together. Super interesting because we see her physically violate somebody's personal space and boundaries pretty much because she is worried about losing them. Even though she's the one in complete control of that, I think she probably has some sort of story in her head of, I can't be with somebody who handles finances this way. I can't be with somebody this irresponsible. So I'm going to force him to be more responsible. And so she actually pays these bills, has a pretty immediate regret. She realizes that what she did was wrong, but she did still do it, which I think is really interesting. That she actually went in and did it. I do think a part of her was genuinely stressed, like this could be detrimental for him. What if he gets in trouble? But I think a larger part of her, if I had to guess, was just worried that this could be a deal breaker. So she felt like it had to be something that she changed and fixed about this person so that they could stay together. And Nick calls her out for that. He says, when are you going to try to stop fixing me? When he finds out. And she's pretty hurt. And she says, I'm just asking you to grow a little bit. And I think the episode ends up going in a pretty interesting direction because Nick does end up trying to take a little bit more responsibility, but I think Jess has also learned her lesson a little bit too, and tries to accept a little bit more of who he is. Now, an appropriate way, I think, to handle this situation would have been to talk to him. And she may have tried, I don't remember. She may have tried to talk to him about it and about her feelings around this box. But if his decision had been, no, I don't touch the box, I don't want to pay any of those bills in this box, this is how I handle things, she could have expressed that, hey, that's not cool with me. I don't think that that's how that should be handled. But ultimately, it's up to him how he wants to handle his life, and she would have all of the permission in the world to end the relationship if she felt like she couldn't be with somebody like that. But ultimately, it's up to him if he wants to change how those things are. You can make requests all day long, but ultimately it is up to that person if they want to accept that request or not, and it's up to you if that's a deal breaker and a reason that the relationship should end. And so I would have loved to see her do a little bit more of that, but obviously for the dramatic purposes, this episode is awesome, and they end up in a pretty decent place where Nick tries to open a bank account with the money she gives back to him, because she does give him his money back, and she ends up coming down to the bank, and they end up throwing a fit over an $8 processing fee together because she's trying to show him, hey, I heard you too. You know, the government is out to get us, or what is this, you know? And so they kind of bond in that moment, and Nick shows her, hey, I do care about you and what you think, so here's me trying. So the part where I really think Jess crossed a line was in actually physically paying those bills, but I think she realized that by the end of the episode. And so the big general piece of advice for that particular story that I would give is people are allowed to do things differently than you would, even if it seems so like different and strange and almost wrong. Now, things that are illegal, which is Jess's argument here, I can understand why you wouldn't approve of it, but people are still technically allowed to do that. They still have their agency. Now, whether the law comes after them or not because of it, that there's still going to be consequences for those things. But that doesn't mean you have the right to control them and stop them from doing those things unless you're like the police and put them in jail. So I think that especially this is something I really relate to. As women in particular, I think we have a tendency to decide that we know what's best. My sister and I have discussed before, this is a trait in my family. We really think we're right. I think that's a human trait in general. We tend to be on our own side, but it can get to the point in our marriages where it feels like we're stifling the ideas of the other person or just assuming that we're on the right track. And that is so hurtful for a marriage, one, because everybody wants to feel heard and deserves to be heard, and two, because your partner has so much to offer, so much to bring to the table. But if you don't allow them to bring that to the table with their own personality, with their own spin on it, with their own takes on the situation, then you are doing yourself and your marriage a disservice. And sometimes you might have to allow them and allow yourself to try things, to do things in a way you wouldn't normally do them. I know that my own husband and I have faced this regarding finances. We have always had kind of slightly different mindsets coming at finances, and I've done my fair share of controlling, trying to change him. And I've tried, not perfect at it, but I've tried to kind of take a step back in this last year or so and allow him to handle things how he would handle them, and we're just fine. And it's okay to allow that and to see what they do. Stepping in and controlling people also prevents them from learning their own lessons, from facing the consequences of their own actions that will come naturally. So it's almost like we're trying to protect them. I think Jess is definitely trying to do that with Nick here. But sometimes the best lessons are learned when those consequences come into play, when something happens. So I would invite you to look at the areas of your life where you're really trying to control somebody and say, hey, can I allow them to see this through? Let them see their thoughts all the way through. They deserve to be able to do that. And one of two things could happen. Maybe they do face those consequences. Maybe it was, quote unquote, the wrong thing to do. But even if they do face some consequences, it might not have been the wrong thing to do. It just was a different way and it didn't pan out. Or you might see that you were wrong. You might see that maybe you weren't necessarily wrong, but that there was another way, potentially even a better way to go about a situation. So that's a little bit about Jessica Day. My general themes here, if you didn't catch them, were 1, not everyone has to like you. 2, you do not have to like everyone. And 3, people are allowed to do things differently than you would. So thank you guys so much for listening this week. If you're not following me on Instagram, follow me at Mallory Jo Mindfulness. I would also invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. You can catch that in the link in the description if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, or if you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.